Hello, and welcome to the 100th episode of the Practice Marketing Podcast. Like always, we are highlighting successful strategies from North America's fastest growing clinics and industry experts so you can learn from their wins and power your practice growth. I'm your host, Neil Trickett, CEO of Practice Promotions. And today's focus, we're going to be talking about the future of the PT industry with Mike Horsfield, president of the American Physical Therapy Association's Private Practice Section. And he's also the CEO of Rock Valley Physical Therapy, which is one of the largest therapist-owned PT practices in the nation. Today, he's going to talk to us about the future of the PT industry. Are we looking at the best days behind us, or is the future bright? And what can PT practices owners still, create thriving businesses in today's economy? And how will that look into the future? So I'm really looking forward to hearing Mike's expertise on our 100th episode of the Practice Marketing Podcast. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Neil.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in. You have your foothold in a lot of different areas. You see a lot of different things happening. But what would you say is the number one challenge that PT businesses are facing in 2024?
I think, in the past, that's always been an easy question, right? It's always been payment, 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 payment for, I think, all the years I've been a PT. But I think over the last couple of years, it's a combination of payment and workforce. And so I think depending on where your practice is and what your access to great talent is, for some people, it is still payment. And I think, there's always ways to improve in that area. But for others, they just don't have enough coworkers. So I think those are the two issues that have really kind of come together here and are really a challenge for most in private practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is something that we were seeing even prior to COVID, right? And then COVID accelerated what was already happening there in those two critical issues that you talked about there. And so, as we go into our next year here, I know there's a lot of things happening on the Hill and advocacy and things like that. What do you see developing for 2025?
Again, they're just recently, as you saw, maybe in the final rule, we had a couple of our issues with PTA supervision, again, which helps us in the ability to be more flexible in the outpatient setting to take care of people by kind of getting that to the same supervision requirements as everyone else. So again, that's a big win. The administrative burden of the plan of care is a big win. As we head into the future, I think it's really about giving the individual business owner more autonomy to run their practice. Okay. And so one of the things I see as a priority, we'll go into APTA Private Practice, we'll go into our priority setting with this new Congress that'll come into office in January. And for us, it's how do we make it easier for people to run their businesses and give them more autonomy over the decisions that they have to do. And so again, some of that has to do with administrative burden. A lot of the MA plans, we're certainly aware of what's happening in that space. So what can we do legislatively there to really limit the administrative burden of those plans moving forward? And then I really believe that the other issue that is a top priority for us is going to be opt out with Medicare. This is one of the areas unless we did a survey. So we do a survey every year, a KPI study for APTA Private Practice where people can input their data and key performance indicators. And we always ask a special question every year on that. And the question last year was, are you limiting access to Medicare patients? Do you have a wait list, or are you no longer taking Medicare because of payment? And I think it was like 17% of the people responded of a wait list or that. So one of the reasons this issue has not gotten passed in Congress before is because of the fear that if physical therapists can opt out, Medicare patients won't have access to care. So in the last time I was on the Hill talking to my representatives, I could share that data with them and say, you know what, it's happening. Okay. So Medicare patients aren't getting, because of payment, Medicare patients aren't getting access to care.
Right.
Now the question is, do you want them to be able to pay for it? For those that can afford it, do you want them to be able to pay for that care? So it's kind of flipped the question a little bit. But the reason I think that's so important is because once we have that ability, obviously we can engage our seniors along with us in the advocacy on the Hill to say, hey, this payment should be at a rate in which it gives the seniors the access to the care they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that that's obviously not limited to just the physical therapy profession. There's like 100 other associations that are fighting along that physician fee
Yeah.
schedule lines, right?
Yeah, I mean, the fee schedule, obviously, there's a bill that's recently been introduced by the Doc Caucus, a bunch of doctors in DC that really talks about applying an inflationary index to the Medicare fee schedule, Medicare inflationary index. That would be wonderful. Again, I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm also a realist. And when you recognize the total cost of that and the financial situation in DC, I don't think we should count on that happening, but ideally that would be the fix that would be great, right? Where we could count
Mhm.
on, rather than these cuts every year, we could count on kind of and plan our businesses around having some type of increase that would be reasonable given what medical inflation index is.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like what you're talking about there, though, as far as the focus, right? The direction, because um, I just remember being in practice and just the regulations and the burden from the administrative burden, what you're talking about. How can we remove those barriers, right, from being able to deliver care, right, deliver service, and that's part of our business model. So any way that we can streamline that, and we've got obviously technologies that are emerging and that we're implementing within the practices to make things easier. But I think that has a whole trickle down effect for efficiency in the business, which comes back to better patient care, but also when we're talking about um, retaining our staff, right?
Yeah,
And it's not just that we may be losing PTs to other competition in the market. They're going out of the profession altogether, right, to other types of jobs. And so we need to make sure that we're able to have jobs for them that don't have excessive demands, right?
yeah,
Of all the extra work that comes with the paperwork, right? And knowing the
yeah.
insurance billing industry and all those kind of things. Where can we go so that they have a reasonable schedule and that we can obviously work on getting paid well for each visit, but then
Yeah.
make it as easy as possible for them to do what they love, which is actually treating patients.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Neil. I think, there's some really interesting information and data that's coming out of what's called PTGQ, which is, again, a way we benchmark PT education against medical, against what medical education does. And they're finding that a lot of therapists are coming out of PT school even more exhausted than some of the med school
Mhm.
students. So the question is, why is that happening, right? No one knows the exact reason, but I think it also looks at a little bit of the burnout in our profession. And I might say a reasonable conclusion, I don't know if this is correct, would be when you start asking, like we went into this profession to help people, to take care of people. And so how much of our day is spent doing that versus other things, both in PT school. And so the thing in PT school is like, how much is being taught that people are like, oh, I didn't go to school for this. This
Mhm.
isn't what I thought it was going to be, right? Those things we do in our life where we can't make sense out of them or they don't fit within our purpose, those are exhausting things. Those are things that drain our battery versus things that we go, oh, this is why I got into this. So,
Mhm.
I always envision this time where I'm in the clinic. And again, I'm just in the clinic in the gym area and I'm just taking care of people all day. And when I'm done taking care of people, I go home, right?
Yeah.
I believe, in that ideal, if we could get closer to that and less time checking boxes and doing the things that we're required to do, that we would fix many of the issues that are related to PT. So yes, I'm all for payment, but I'm also all for this idea of like, get us back to why we did this and let's put more purpose. Let's get
Mhm.
more purpose back in our profession. I think that's ideally the way we overcome some of the burnout issues.
And I think there are areas where maybe on a state level that there's some pushback, right? Some fighting against authorizations and limitation of care and the excessive demands of insurance companies just to prove that therapy is warranted. Have you heard of any of that happening?
Oh yeah, I mean it's happening all over right now. I mean, again, the UHC came up with some of their prior authorization on their MA plans, and it's been a huge deal. We've been trying to, we've been communicating with them on the national level. We've also been working kind of through every legislative and regulatory vehicle we can have because it's simply unnecessary. It's very clear that it's set up in a way in which it's trying to make it difficult to see patients. And again, you read about these not just in the physical therapy space, but the medical space where people are waiting too long for necessary procedures, right? So
Mhm.
it's if you follow the incentives, it makes sense why they would do that. But again, that is why we have to come together to really try to remove those issues, or at least just make it clear to the
Right.
general public of what's happening here. And again, I believe if we keep the patients we serve at the center of our advocacy, we will be better served. Because this isn't about us. This is about the people we take care of every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really see now happening is across the whole healthcare spectrum, whereas there were certain issues, obviously, that were more, you know, 10, 15 years ago that were more PT focused, and it was harder to get enough, legislative traction with that.
Yeah,
But the impacts now are across, the AMA is backing things.
yeah.
We have a lot of other, big associations that are in the advocacy too. So, do you see that on the Hill that there's more alignment from all these different associations?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, most of the things we go to the Hill with are a coalition. Us and speech therapy and occupational therapy, we've always been kind of aligned. But even, some of the other times there's always been a battle back and forth. But even with kind of the plan of care, removing kind of the plan of care requirements, if we have a referral, we can send the plan of care, and now it's going to be okay. We don't need to track it and get it signed back. But even in there, the AMA and the orthopedic section, even the orthopods were like, yeah, often they'll stay silent or they'll actually support it, but they're like, no, like that's less headache for us, right? They don't want to have to track those down and sign them either. So I think when we talk about when we talk about a Medicare and an inflationary index being applied to codes, like everyone's in agreement on that. I think sometimes when you get into, okay, we're going to keep the pot only this big, and now we got to decide how to split it up. There's where you get everyone competing for their own best interest. And again, that makes sense as well. I mean, we do the same thing. So,
Got it. Yeah, and I know you obviously are connected with hundreds of different PT practices out there, maybe thousands, right? Um, and there's lots of different issues that are on there, as especially when it comes to reimbursements, right? And the challenges that we have there. And there's the legislative side of things, obviously, that the APTA and PPS is really trying to tackle. But I'm curious, from your point of view, as you speak with a lot of different practice owners out there, are you seeing other innovations at the clinic level where they're focusing more on, say, cash pay alternatives or bringing additional services into their practices? Are you seeing those kind of things happening?
yeah, I have, and I think one of the things that I really realized is, when we and APTA Private Practice, along with the orthopedic section and APTA, has created a payment consortium. We're calling it Spark, which is really focused on state payment, and it's about educating people on how to contract, smart. It's called yeah, I'm trying to contracting for smart PTs. We kind of crossed out the dummy thing, kind of played on that, but and I've talked to many people in the cat, that started kind of purely cash based. Our company started, in a more traditional insurance model. I really believe we're all going to end up in the middle in a hybrid. If we're
Mm,
all really smart about, so when I was talking to the cash based group, I was like, man, you're doing all this. That's great. Your market's really limited, right, on the people that can afford to pay cash or who would prefer to use their insurance. And I said, I bet if you knew what I got paid from some payers, you'd be willing to take those contracts as well. And they kind of said, well, we take the good payers. We just don't take the bad payers. And I'm like, well, you're
right.
smart. You're smarter than we are. We started with accepting all, and we're working towards the idea of only taking the contracts. And again, I always say this, that we're only going to take if we all only took contracts that allowed us to take great care of our patients and our coworkers, we would all win.
Yeah.
Because again, that I think if we all were really intentional and smart about that, um, those payers on the bottom would have to change. They need sites.
Right.
They need network adequacy, is what it's called, to sell insurance in our
Mhm.
areas. And if all the providers are saying no, that doesn't work for us anymore, then they've got to respond in a way. And we're seeing that. We're seeing increases in payment commercially. We're seeing wins at the state level. There was 40 advocacy wins across the nation last year. So when you talk about how hard it is, yes. And Neil, I'd say, we were sharing a little bit about your business. Like the opportunity for us right now is now is the time.
Huge.
Demand is
Yeah.
greater than supply. Like
Yeah.
every business would love the problems we have right now, where there's more people want what we have than we have coworkers to provide it. Usually businesses would raise their price at this time, right?
Mhm.
To get those two to equal out. Well, we can do that if we just stop taking the contracts at the bottom of our list, right? And
Totally
so
agree with
I
that.
think that's the opportunity in front of us right now. And I see people doing it, and I see people have success. And again, I'm guilty of wanting to take care of all my neighbors and having a hard time saying no. That I think the payers use that big PT heart against us in this time
Right.
where we
Yeah.
have a sense of obligation and responsibility to take care of everyone. But I really believe if we don't detach the heart from the mind here in this period, eventually we won't be able to take care of anyone because we won't be taking great care of our coworkers. And
Yeah.
that's where our primary responsibility, I think, lies.
I think that's such a great point. And it's something that in as a practice owner you can control, right?
Yeah,
And if you know your value, like what does it actually cost you to deliver, a patient visit in cost, right? We should all
yeah,
that know that number. Don't take anything that's, whatever your profit margin you want to be off of that,
yeah,
don't take anything less than that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think where I'm guilty of that because I remember being in practice and being like, oh my gosh, we need to get new patients in. And, if we take a certain insurance from a doctor, they'll send us other referrals. And,
Yeah, that's
so we've all been there and it
yeah,
can be hard. It can be nerve-wracking. It can be a little fearful to say, no, we're not going to take this insurance. But one thing I do see with clients that we work with is that when they are able to control their marketing more and have more confidence in their marketing and know that they can attract people to them, especially in this market where, like you said, there is a lot of opportunity, you can bring in those higher payers, right?
yeah, yeah.
You just have to be able to say no to those low
Yep.
payers,
Yeah,
right?
it's the hardest thing. And if I put a shameless plug in, I think one of the things we're doing at APTA Private Practice and we're launching later this year is that negotiation series, like I said. So I think some of the thing of taking away the fear, we certainly have all the right feelings. It should be hard to do this, right? Like I always say that like these kind of decisions should be hard if you can do them and that bat an eye at denying someone care. Maybe you're not in the right business, but if it's hard for you to do that, you're in the right business. Now the question is how do you do it? And
Yeah.
that would be to be able to predict on the other end. So part of the series is going to be to look at that and say you're faced with the situation of demand greater than supply. Do I hire the next coworker or do I get rid of my lowest paying contracts? And to provide the tools where you can look at your business's financials pre and post and have some sense of security of like, oh, I'm going to be okay if
Hmm.
I do this and get to the other end. And then, like you said, then you just got to go out and say, okay, now where do I need to hunt for the people, with the insurances that I'm going to accept and have a marketing plan that's very strategic in that way.
I love your approach to that and the way that the APTA is approaching that because I think, you know, uh, sometimes in practice we expect the APTA to fix everything, right?
Yeah,
From the insurance world. And that's, I think, flipping that on its head and how can we rise, the whole tide, right? And
yeah,
rise all the
yeah,
ships with that. Those kind of things do have to be done at the local level. And I remember being in practice and I got, I had that realization. I got into that habit where I asked for a contract negotiation basically every 6 months.
yeah,
And I think as practice owners, we really have to implement that kind of rhythm where we're pushing hard back in terms of what is the payment that we need from the insurance company for certain, services. And because I did that, and it's really amazing because it's actually who really in that
yeah,
world,
yeah.
right? And how you massage them. Chocolates and flowers went a long way with the network managers, and I was able to get the highest rate for United Healthcare in like 3 counties.
Yeah,
just because I was persistent, right? And I played a game with it. And I think you're doing the absolute right thing where we're like bring it back to the practice owner. Like you can have a difference in the contract negotiations. And there's a lot of tips and tools out there to help you with that.
Yeah. You got to ask, as you said, Neil, right? Like very seldom people are going to give you a raise if you never ask. So you got to start there, and then you got to be kind and you got to be persistent. And then you also have to you have to be brave enough to walk away when it doesn't make sense, right? And that is those aren't easy things. But I'm with you. Like, before getting involved with APTA and APTA Private Practice, again, there was some assumptions I made that were wrong, and that had to do, like, yes, APTA absolutely is working on the state regulatory issues and making sure that the PT license is protected and that you have the right to practice and that your practice act is open and protected. And they're working federally with advocacy at the Medicare level and with regulations. Private payers, they can't negotiate your private payers. So they have nothing, it's illegal for them to do it. And when we're rolling out this this negotiation series, we actually talked to an antitrust attorney in DC and said, hey, what can we do and what can't we do to make sure we're doing things correctly. But I will share, like, there is nothing APTA will do for private practice if you take bad contracts. Nothing they do will matter if you accept contracts that don't allow you to take care, because that's up to them, up to the individual practice owner. And again, I've been guilty of that. I'm not sitting here casting blame. We as an organization need to be better at this, and we're kind of committed to doing it, given that the opportunity, as I said, right now is the perfect time to do this.
And I love what you said earlier about the model that we're shifting towards, I believe also is that hybrid model,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And there's patients that will come in with insurance, but they'll probably need more care than what their insurance will pay for.
Yep.
And so what you have to get better at in your clinic is you have to get better at marketing and you have to get better at sales.
Yep.
Right. And so
Yep.
those two things, if you get better at and you have better processes and systems within the clinic, you'll have a lot more control over your revenue, right? Obviously, with
Absolutely.
the patients that you're
Yeah.
treating there. I've
And
seen
we
the
had a
most, we work with a lot of clinics that are bringing in a lot of other services or service lines to what they're doing.
Yep.
And what I find is that they're actually much more marketable. The public likes to go to a one-stop shop, right? So if you offer multiple service lines within your practice, that's more attractive to a buyer. And I think one area that we could really strengthen as a profession is what kind of continuous care can we provide to our clients. There's so many times when we discharge a patient and we're like, hey, you should really keep going to the gym, right? Or you should really, but they're like, 65, 70 years old and they don't know really what to do at the gym, and you don't really have a gym set up. And so, it doesn't really work out. And then guess what? They don't go, right? And then they come back 6 months later because the problem flared up again. But what are we doing? What can you be doing actually as a practice owner to think about what can we be providing to patients so that we can continue to help them? And I think one of the genius things that's come along recently is stretch labs. I mean, they
Yeah.
totally beat us to the mark, right? In terms of, here's a subscription model. It's one of the fastest growing franchises in North America because guess what? The public likes to get stretched.
Yeah.
What do we do in PT? We stretch patients all day long, right? But why don't we have a subscription model for that,
Yeah.
right? After care. It's like, duh, right? And so, there's that's just one of the things that we could be offering. But I think there's lots of opportunity for us to think about cash value add services to our practice lines.
Do you want more freedom in your clinic? Then you need to work on your business, not just in it. The top practice owners know that they need a marketing system that consistently attracts patients from the internet. And at Practice Promotions, we've helped hundreds of practice owners skyrocket to the top of Google and get more new patients from online. Go to practicepromotions.net/kit to get our free practice marketing sample kit. It includes all our digital marketing tips and tricks that will get you new patients from Google. That's practicepromotions.net/kit, KIT, for a free marketing kit. And now back to the show.
No, I think you're right on, Neil. And that idea of even using that word kind of is like nails on a chalkboard for me, for those old enough to remember what a chalkboard is. But just that word discharge, right? Like, again, if you are that patient's physical therapist, not them going to physical therapy, and you own that relationship and their health and wellness, yes, what do they need, and how can you, be that advocate? And then again, if there's an additional revenue stream there, if you're acting in their best interest, I'm all for that, right? Like, I'm not big on the upsell of a bunch of things to make the business work, but when it's aligned with what the patient wants and needs, and like you said, if they're coming asking for it, you should have your ears open, right? Like, that's what business does, meets what the needs of the community are. And so if people keep asking you for the same thing over and over again, that's something where you should at least go, huh, maybe can I do that? Does it make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. So we've had some great discussions here along the lines of reimbursement, advocacy, things that are happening there. Let's talk a little bit here, shift gears towards retention of employees, right? And also meeting we've got a growing industry here, right? The demand, like you said, is going through the roof. It's only going to get more as our baby boomers get older and the population ages. So what are some of the things that at PPS we're looking at for the workforce, right? And in terms of retention, what the things are we doing? Maybe even on the training side, right? And anything on the university side of things.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think the universities are kind of looking at this right now and trying to really get to the root of why are students leaving school, you know, more exhausted than medical students. I think that's something we have to address. I think, again, I don't like to, I believe we're all in this together and it's a continuum. So again, I will trust academia to investigate that and look at that. And then I think when they enter the workforce, again, I think that's our responsibility to truly look at that and ask the question of, like, why did you get in this profession? What drew you to this?
Mhm.
And are we really doing it? So are we really fulfilling our promise to them of giving them meaningful, purposeful work? Or does it feel like, does it feel like a job? Does it feel, like a mill? You hear these words, and again, that really bothers me as someone who really loves this profession, but maybe more so the professionals that make it up. And so I think as practice owners, we really have to look at that. I love economics. I love the laws. I always say I have a love-hate relationship with both the laws of gravity and the laws of economics. But you can complain about them or you can use them to your advantage. And I want to believe the organizations that solve this problem will win. So that's where, from a PPS standpoint, there's a wonderful amount of education right now. There were several topics at our annual conference on employee retention and engagement. Joy at work was one of them, talking about one of, I love this topic and I could go on and on about it, but one of the blessings of COVID was that my coworkers asked me to do a talk on work-life balance. And I'm like, I don't know anything about this. So I took the Harvard course on happiness, there, and, there's several components to it. But again, one of the things that I don't think that I worry we take away um, is this a great part of happiness in our life. It has to do with the achievement of something difficult and overcoming something difficult, right? And I think that sometimes when we hear this thing about I'm stressed out or I'm burnout or the work-life balance isn't there, sometimes we want to take everything away instead of making sure we understand what they really enjoy and what their goals are, and helping our coworkers work towards those goals of achieving something really difficult. Maybe that's a fellowship, or maybe that's a certification in something. Maybe that's a progression to a management job. But are we acting in our coworkers' best interest? Are we acting in ours? And I believe if we really know our coworkers and we're acting in their best interest, that's how we'll eventually, be able to navigate through this successfully.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying there, because I think you have to balance those two areas, right? One is going to be how do you retain great
Yeah,
employees that you have, and how do you attract good employees that
yeah,
you have? The good news is that when you have programs to really retain employees and you work hard on that, you naturally start to attract more
Yes.
top
Yeah.
talent towards you. But like you said, I think that when uh, when we're you don't necessarily have to take things away from the person, right? You have to make sure that, okay, are we aligning to what their interests are and their purpose? And um, I think one mistake we can have as practice owners is we can get so fixated on the business side of it that we forget about the growth of the actual PTs, right,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
clinic. And so what kind of, and it doesn't have to be on you as a practice owner. It could be simple things like creating a mentorship group, right,
Right.
within the clinic.
Yeah.
We used to, at our clinic, provide continuing education, like just simple
Yep.
things. And then having times where it could be a discussion group, right, on cases, right? And so that, if you can carve out, if it's not just about the visits, right, you can carve out half an hour, 45 minutes in a week to have like a case management, and it can be a discussion, and it gets people thinking, beyond their day-to-day, right,
Yep.
activities, right, and what
Yeah.
they do to grow themselves professionally. I think that's what a lot of people are looking for.
Yeah. And it builds a sense of community too, right? Like people get to know each other in a different way.
Mhm.
In those. And you mentioned about the numbers, and I think I think one of the things that we always can do better on is how do we message the metrics? The metrics should be feedback. They should not be weaponized. And so,
Mhm.
when I say that, when you look at arrival rate, like an arrival rate is simply like, it's a reflection of how great you're doing, that person wants to come back. They could do anything with that, whatever. It's an hour of their time plus whatever they're paying for it. But 92% of the time they choose to come see you. Like, how cool is that? Right?
Mhm.
Like if that metric is measured, with that, and time units about how much time you spend. And if they're not
Yeah.
spending enough time, like, hey, do you not have enough tools in the toolbox? What kind of con ed, what do you be interested in? Like, it can be really an engagement around this clinical success and becoming a great clinician. Again, assuming that person's there because they want to do this and they want to
Mhm.
be great at it. The metrics are simply feedback that we should use. But often I think what happens is they just get thrown on somebody's desk and said, do better, and
Right.
there's no context or understanding exactly of how those matter, and how those really just is a look in the mirror for me as a clinician saying, hey, am I doing better today than I did yesterday? And if not, how can you help me?
And that's just a really fantastic approach that you talk about. Simple changes in words, right,
Uh-huh.
can make a huge difference. And if we go and say, hey, you have a 7% cancellation rate, right? It feels very negative, very down, right?
Yeah.
But if you're like, hey, 92, 93% of people came and saw you this week. Good job on that. What do you think we could do better? Like,
Yeah.
and it just creates dialogue, gets them thinking in the right way, which is what you ultimately want, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think too, like one area in practice to just kind of look at is, are you doing enough to develop the soft skills? And that can be, especially with new grads, we see that, right? Is that it takes years to actually develop your soft skills as a clinician. And, you have a senior therapist, and they can just, they feel so comfortable with a patient, and they can just, talk, and they can sell them on their plan of care, why they need to be doing these kind of things, right? And then, new grads, we're trying to think about, all the technicalities and things that we need to be doing, manipulation, mobilization wise, and everything, right? That we need time to develop our soft skills. So I think that's something to really look at, is if you're bringing in, especially like new grads, or don't even assume that someone, because they've been working for a while, has those soft skills.
Right.
But just if you kind of take that through a program, and there's lots of different trainings out there to develop soft skills and what to look for. But that could be something that really could help you in your practice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly something you appreciate, as at least I have, as my hair got grayer and grayer, that I was taking for granted some of those tiny lessons learned over time, right? And one practice owner who I respect a lot, he even during the interview process would go through a subjective interview and an education. He'd have the interviewer do that, and then he would do the same thing. They would reverse roles, and then he would ask the person, "What did you see differently?" Looking for that, like, did they appreciate the subtlety of how that was messaged, and did they appreciate of how they were talked about the plan of care and how they're going to follow up. And so I think that's one of the things, the tools you can just use in the clinic is, who is the best person in your office for arrival rate? And if there's somebody that needs help, have that person observe them and then debrief on it afterwards of like, what did you see different in that? Because I think if someone lacks that self-awareness that there was something different, you've got a different issue. But sometimes it's just like, oh, I get it. And again, I learned that lesson from a retired, my first person I worked here at Rock Valley under. He was an old school therapist, but man, he could get people to do anything. And I had to let go of my ego that I was trained better than him. And I had to watch him and go, wow, the fact that he sits on that table and he like asks them how they're doing and he pauses long enough to see how they reply before he gets into what he's doing. Like that is something that just then they will do anything he asked them to do, right? This was in a hospital setting up on a floor where I was struggling to get people out of bed, but he could get anybody up to do anything. And it was just that empathy, but it took a second of his time, but man, it made a huge difference. And I didn't want to learn that lesson early on, but I had no choice because I was struggling so bad.
I love it. I love it. And so obviously the CEO of a very large PT group. What kind of things have you tried to implement from being able to attract therapists in? Like, do you have like mentorship programs, internship programs? Like, what kind of things do you see being successful there?
Yeah, we've always been big on the Con Ed, continuing education allowance, always been, above what our, competitors were in that area and committed to the professional development. And then again, we have partnerships with some of the universities around and again, Rich Shields at the University of Iowa came to us several years ago. I was like, man, I believe the students when they come out would love to have 6 months where it's a kind of almost a mini residency, but not extra. He didn't want to add cost to that, so it doesn't want to pay residency, but that structured learning. So we created that. That led to then when those individuals were done with 6 months, they're like, we want to keep going, and so then it became a year long, and now it's a 2 year. We call it Rock U, and it has morphed over the past 10 years or however long we've been doing it to where now it's both clinical, it's professional development. As far as learning customer service, talking with the executive team of how the business works, being able to do Q&As on that. So and we also, our philanthropic group works through that. So, they part of their days go out and give back to the communities. And for us, with our spread across kind of 3 states, it creates a sense of community for those therapists that start with us that year. They get to know other people in other areas and that they can become kind of informal mentors or people they can reach out to. So that's our professional development, but then also from a leadership. The reason Rock Valley has grown is because, I mean, primarily we looked at it several years ago and say, do we just hunker down and stay where we are, or do we grow? Well, the reason we chose to grow is we didn't want to lose good people. And we knew that if we did not grow and did not have opportunities for people to advance, that we were at risk of losing these really great coworkers that we work alongside. So we created a GAS gang, which is our young leadership development group. GAS, I like to tell the story. Some people don't like it, but a couple of our young therapists came to me one day and said, I'd love to know how the business works. And I said, we always kept that separate from our clinicians because we thought it was dirty and icky. And we're like, let us run the business. You go do the great things with patients. I said, why do you want to know that? And they said, because we give a shit how this company does. And we want to know how we can help. And so we took the give a shit and used the acronym GAS. But again, we'll have nine to 12 people a year that are identified by their coworkers as potential leaders in the organization. So we do, not to mention just the day to day, hey, what do you think about this? We have niche practices that do, I encourage this. This is a really low cost. Is our people passionate in vestibular therapy or pelvic health or pediatrics? We have little discussion groups over lunch hours, once a month, each of those groups. So if you're interested in that, you can jump on and
That's
you can
cool.
present something. You can hear somebody present something. But those are all ways to create community, way to create engagement, way to create opportunities. And so again, as you said, our primary mode is retention and engagement with that, or that's the byproduct of that, I guess. And the attraction part comes from mostly word of mouth.
Yeah, I love it. And just really good development of individuals that way. And I think for smaller clinics out there, if you're a single or just a few location type practice, as a practice owner, realize that you don't have to do all that yourself. I think that there's probably therapists that love teaching, right, in your practice. And can you carve out a little bit of time, for them that they could focus on maybe helping you with developing some internships, right? Or maybe they could be the person that helps with mentoring. They could be the lead therapist for that. So these are the things that you need to develop within your business, but you don't have to do it all yourself, right?
Well, when we were talking about the satisfaction, or the burnout, I think a Mayo study that came out said that, when they looked at they surveyed their team and looked at it, you only have to do what you love 15% of the day
That's
to
pretty cool.
not get burnout. That's what they found with physician and nurses at Mayo. And so, and they call those red threads. And so again, what's your red thread? What is the thing in which when you do it, you leave with more energy than you entered, right? That's a
Mhm.
red thread. And those aren't always intuitive to us. So it's really important, I think, as practice leaders to like go with a notebook, sucks energy, gives energy, and go through your day and have some of your coworkers do that same thing. And you might find that what sucks energy from you, it was really what somebody else loves.
Yep.
And that's how you both end up with a better sense of fulfillment at the end of the day. Like I had no idea people love to put stuff in spreadsheets. I thought that was just something you had to do, but our CFO loves to do that. So,
Mhm.
you can throw them and the same thing, whether it be clinical education, whether it be setting up staff schedules, I mean, there's all kinds of things that it's amazing at providing somebody with just a little opportunity to do something they love will make a big difference in kind of how your team comes together and also what you learn about them through the process.
Yeah, I love that. So, one of the things that I've just been really admired about you and the APTA and the PPS section there is that there's such a great group of individuals that volunteer and give so much of their time to advance the profession forward. And I'd love to hear from you in terms of like what why should a practice owner out there care about what they can be part of with the APTA and with the PPS section?
That's a great question. Why should they care? I don't know if I can make them care, Neil, but I think I can share my experience, I guess. And again, this is going to be very cliche, but um, there's two things. One is I think, what does it, I mean, anytime you give, if that's in your DNA, you get more than you get back, and that's certainly been the case in my way. So if anyone's interested and they feel that, I would encourage it. I think why APTA, again, there's a lot of different organizations that are advocating and trying to help us, but I think when I look at why do I give my time to APTA and APTA private practice, it's because they're going to be here long after I'm gone, right? I'm compelled by I always cry every time I talk about our profession, but I'm compelled. I grew up on a farm, and I got this sense of stewardship of leaving the land better than I found it.
Mhm.
It's just built into who I am, and I think if I'm going to donate my time and I'm going to give, and I'm going to try to make this profession better for the next group of people that come along, I want to do it with people that are going to be here long after I'm gone.
Mhm.
And that's why I personally have chosen APTA and APTA private practice. Again, because I want people to, I love the gifts I've received and the blessings I've received of being in private practice. I want that opportunity to be there for people in the future. And I know APTA is the stewards of our land. They are the ones that will be here, and they share that same interest in making it better for the next generation. So that's why I give, and why I would encourage others who have time and interest to think about volunteering as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think I've been with APTA since probably 2002.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I don't. I mean, again, I'm sure it's okay to
yeah.
disagree. I mean, I don't agree with everything APTA does. I don't agree with maybe everything APTA private practice does, right? Like, I mean, we serve a diverse audience. There's many interests within our profession. Um,
Mhm.
but again, I think that's the beauty of when you do belong with those groups and you have those discussions, you'll start to understand that that's the magic, is to be a part of an organization where you can have a different opinion, a different thought, and still get along. That's the kind of place I love to and
Yeah,
organizations I love to be a part of.
I love that. And I think for our audience out there, if you're a practice owner, you need to be part of your profession, right? And that there's so much that you can learn from others. There's fantastic peer-to-peer groups in there. I've heard wonderful stories from our clients that got connected and they learned from each other. So there's some really awesome programs that you're probably just not aware of within the private practice section for business owners. And you don't have to go it alone, right? As a practice owner, there's tons of support for you. And I highly encourage you to become a member. It's not much money at all, right?
Yeah.
And you can get so much more out of it and really connect with people to move your business forward. And when you can be around people that have been there, but then also gone through it and are bigger on the other side, you can learn so much, right? And things that you can't come up with on your own necessarily for that.
I agree with you, Neil. I think, the hard part, the real honest truth is, even if non-members get all the benefit of our money we spend on advocating in DC and policy change, right? So when we get things passed in DC, they don't come to you and say, are you a member of APTA? You get this benefit or you don't. Everyone gets it. So people will argue like, why do I need to belong when I get it for free anyway, right? Like that's a solid statement. But I think what you said is what you won't get is the personal connections. What you won't get is the sense of community. One of my favorite sayings, a Swedish proverb that says, a shared sorrow is half a sorrow and a shared joy is twice the joy. Being in private practice can be lonely at times, especially for the small private practitioner. It's you don't have anyone to share those worrisome moments with, and maybe just as importantly, you don't have anybody to share the successes with. To kind of go look at what I achieved. Like there's nobody around that understands. And I would say there's nobody maybe at your clinic, but once you engage in APTA practice, you'll find that, wow, I'm not alone. These people get me. And I think that's everyone's response when they show up at APTA Private Practice the first time is like, I found my people. Like these people get me. I didn't have to say anything, and they have all the same worries and all the same challenges and all the same dreams I have. So I think that's what you won't get by sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, and every year that I go to PPS, it's just fun seeing all the familiar faces, right? And running into people and asking how they're doing. They're asking, and you get tips and advice all the time from that. And like I said, there's tons of like peer-to-peer groups in there. There's lots of awesome programs within there that help you advance your business forward. And we were just talking about some of those initiatives here that that you and the team have really put together here and going into 25 that I think will be a big help for practice owners. So I highly encourage you to get out there. Just go on the APTA website and PPS and just go ahead and just join, right? You'll really get a lot out of it there.
Yeah.
So Mike, just kind of looking forward here, as a practice owner, right? And giving advice to practice owners, what would you say is one of the main things that they could do here to grow their business here going into 2025?
To grow their business. I think to grow your business is, I guess, just general business advice, maybe, and I do think this translates to growing business, is to know what you do well. And maybe more importantly, what you don't do well. To have an honest conversation. Again, I talked about how the metrics are feedback for your coworkers, but they're also feedback for practice owners. And I don't think we always receive that feedback because it hurts sometimes. It's hard to look at. I mean, that's why I don't have many mirrors around the house. I don't like that feedback that much. But I think if you're really honest with yourself and you say, man, we are really good at this and we should do more of that. And we're not that good at this. And maybe we should stop doing that. I think those are great ways that businesses can grow. And I don't think we often ask ourselves the second half of that question of, what are those sacred cows? What are we still doing that maybe our customers aren't appreciating? Maybe our coworkers aren't appreciating. But I think, right now the environment would tell us demand for what you do is greater than it's ever been. So feedback I look at is you can get publicly traded information from some of the companies that are publicly traded and find out how their same store sales growth is, which is really how much year over year they grow and how much is the market growing. And if you're not growing that fast, like you gotta find somebody to help you. You got to do something different. because not growing as fast as the market grows maybe is feedback that you're not doing as good a job with something that other people are doing, and you got to figure that out. So I think that honest reflection, embrace good and bad news as valuable feedback, and then do more of what you're great at and love, and do less of what you're not.
Awesome advice there, Mike. Thank you so much for that. And I would say too, like, just as a practice owner, you've got to carve out the time to have that mental capacity, right? To have that reflection on like, okay, what are we doing strong in the business here? What's weak and what can we work on, right? But you can't do it if you're treating 40 hours a week of patient care and then trying to handle all the fires on top of that. So
No,
you
absolutely.
gotta step back a little bit. You gotta get out of the practice and just kind of reflect, right? And create your plan. I love it. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's
yeah.
it's so important, Neil. I'm glad you brought that up. That is, I mean, again, I assume that that's happening, and I realize that it's not in a lot of cases because of that. But again, that working that extra patient or two in the day versus spending the time doing the management it's a vicious cycle that doesn't end well.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mike, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Horsfield here, the president of the Private Practice Section of the American Physical Therapy Association and the CEO of Rock Valley Physical Therapy. Thank you, Mike, for your time and expertise here. We learned so much today. And thank you again for being on the podcast with us.
You're welcome, Neil. Thank you. I really appreciate your support. And again, it's what an honor to be the 100th guest of yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure for that. And to our listeners out there, thank you so much for being our listeners here through the 100th episode of our Practice Marketing Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube and our podcast. And we've got all our social channels out there. And also, we've got tons of advice for you and free downloads and tools on practicepromotions.net. So don't forget to check that out. And again, Neil Trickett here from Practice Promotions and the Practice Marketing Podcast, wishing you much success in your practice.
A free way for you to support our show is by leaving a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's a chance for you to tell us what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it as well. Just scroll down to ratings and review on your phone and click Write a Review. Thanks.